Despite a voluminous and often fervent literature on income distribution, the cold fact is that most income is not distributed. It is earned.
Have you ever been in like a conversation, about the economy, and you hear someone throw out this phrase, income distribution, and you just think to yourself, wait a minute, is it really that simple? Like it's some magical pie
Yeah.
that just gets sliced up,
It's definitely one of those things that, economists have been wrestling with for a long time.
Yeah.
And it's really a lot more complicated than it might seem at first glance.
Yeah, this whole idea that income is just, like you said, distributed. I mean, it doesn't really tell the whole story.
Right.
And that's where that quote from Thomas Sowell really comes in.
Yeah.
He said that most income is not distributed, it is earned.
That quote, it always just kind of stops me in my tracks.
Right.
Because it really does challenge this assumption.
It does.
That income is something that's just, handed out there.
Yeah, absolutely. To really dig into this, I think it's helpful to go back and look at some of these classic economic thinkers.
Okay.
And, one of the big ones is John Stuart Mill.
And he made this famous distinction between the production of wealth and the distribution of wealth. And he argued that production, so how much wealth is actually created? That's governed by these like natural laws. But the distribution of that wealth is a matter of human choices.
Okay, so he's saying that there's like a fundamental difference between the forces that determine how much wealth we create as a society.
Right.
And then the decisions we make about how to divide it all up.
Yeah, exactly. And that seemingly simple idea, right, that we can kind of separate the creation of wealth from its distribution, that's caused a ton of debate over the years.
Yeah.
Even economists like Walter Lippmann, writing back in the 1930s, they pushed back really hard against Mill's idea. They argued that you can't just tinker with distribution without having some impact on production.
Right. It's like they're intertwined.
Yeah, they are.
It's not that simple.
It's not.
And it feels like we're still having that debate today.
Oh, absolutely.
I mean, just think about how often you hear people arguing about income fairness without really even talking about the complex processes that actually created the wealth in the first place.
Yeah, that's such a good point. And this tension between, creating wealth and then figuring out how to distribute it fairly.
Right.
That's something economists are still wrestling with today.
Yeah.
It really raises the question, what does a fair system actually look like?
Right. And if it were as easy as just, giving everyone the same amount,
right,
you would think we would have figured that out by now.
Right.
There's got to be something more to it.
There is.
And here's something I find really interesting. Even Karl Marx, right?
Yeah.
The father of communism.
Yeah.
He wasn't a big fan of these like simplistic ideas of redistribution.
You're absolutely right. Marx was super critical of what he called vulgar socialism.
Okay.
Which he basically saw as this naive oversimplification of how economics actually work.
Okay.
And there's this great line in his critique of the Gotha program where he dismisses the idea of equal distribution as obsolete verbal rubbish.
Obsolete verbal rubbish.
Yeah.
I love that.
Right.
But wait a minute. So if even Marx,
Right.
someone who, really championed the working class,
Yep.
had issues with just, dividing everything up equally.
Yeah.
Doesn't that make you think that there are some deeper issues at play here?
It totally does. And it takes us right into the heart of modern economic theory, especially when we start talking about taxation and incentives.
Right.
One of the big challenges for economists is this thing called optimal tax theory.
Okay.
And basically, it's about trying to design a tax system that finds that perfect balance
Right.
between fairness and efficiency.
Okay.
And let me tell you, it's way more complicated than it sounds.
Yeah, I bet.
Even these approaches like new welfare economics,
Oh,
which
right.
tries to take into account, the messiness of the real world,
Right.
they still run into some really big limitations.
So, what are some of those limitations? I mean, this is where I start to get lost in the weeds sometimes.
Sure. Well, just think about it this way. Like any tax policy that you create, it's going to have some unintended consequences.
Oh, yeah, for sure.
So let's say you decide, okay, we're going to tax high earners, like really heavily.
Okay.
On the surface, that might sound good,
Yeah.
but it could actually end up discouraging those high earners from working as hard
Right.
or investing as much. And that could actually end up hurting the whole economy.
So it's like a domino effect.
It is.
Like one change can trigger all these other changes
Exactly.
that I might not have even thought about.
Yeah. And on the flip side, if you give too much support to people who aren't working,
Right.
it might unintentionally make them less likely to look for a job.
Right.
So you're always trying to find that sweet spot
Right.
where you're providing a safety net,
Yeah.
but you're not discouraging people from working hard and coming up with new ideas.
It's tricky.
It
It's
is
like a balancing act.
It is a balancing act.
It's so interesting to me how even the most well-intentioned policies
Yeah.
can have these like ripple effects that we don't anticipate.
Absolutely.
And speaking of unintended consequences, this reminds me of something I read by Tim Harford,
Oh, yeah.
the undercover economist.
Mhm.
He talks about this thought experiment where you have this completely random lump sum tax. Like, let's say everyone whose name starts with the letter H has to pay a certain amount
Yeah.
just because
Yeah, I love that example.
it's so random.
It is.
But it makes you think.
It does. And it's brilliant because it shows how even a totally random approach to redistribution can still create these ripple effects throughout the economy.
Right.
You just can't design a system
Right.
that doesn't somehow affect people's behavior.
Right. Even in ways that you didn't expect.
Exactly.
So it's not just as simple as taking from one group
Nope.
and giving to another. There are all these other things that we have to think about.
There are.
And this kind of brings us back to Sowell's point
Yeah.
about income being earned,
Yeah.
not just distributed.
Yeah. You know, even Nobel laureate Joseph Stiglitz
Okay.
has expressed some real doubts about whether lump sum redistribution is even possible.
Okay.
He argues that governments simply don't have enough information
Right.
to perfectly assess everyone's abilities and needs.
Which makes sense.
Yeah.
Because if you can't perfectly assess those things,
Right.
then any attempt to create some ideal distribution of wealth,
Yeah.
it becomes almost impossible.
It does. It really does. It's like trying to solve a puzzle when you're missing half the pieces.
Right.
And it just highlights how incredibly complex these issues actually are.
So complex.
Yeah.
Yeah, it really does make you think about the limits of trying to control something as complex as income distribution, from the top down,
Yeah.
like from some central authority. It makes you wonder, are there other ways to even approach this problem?
That's a great question. And it gets to like the core of what we're talking about here. If we move away from this idea that income is something to be like distributed by somebody,
Right.
how should we think about economic policy and social support and all of that?
Yeah. If we acknowledge that maybe the magical pie analogy is kind of flawed,
Right.
what are the alternatives? Like, what are some ways to support people who are struggling without creating like a ton of unintended consequences?
Well, instead of focusing all of our energy on just redistributing income, maybe we should be thinking more about how to create an environment where everybody has a real shot at earning a decent living.
Okay.
So things like, education, job training programs that help people start businesses, giving people the tools they need to actually succeed.
So it's more like baking a bigger pie
Yeah,
instead of just arguing about how to slice up the one we already have.
exactly. That's a great way to put it. But of course, the question is, how do we actually do that?
Right. How do we bake that bigger pie in a way that's fair
Right.
and make sure that everybody benefits?
Yeah, you're absolutely right. Not everybody starts out with the same opportunities.
Right.
And that's where things like targeted social safety nets become really important. The goal shouldn't be to create a system where everybody ends up with the same outcome no matter what.
Right.
It's about providing a safety net for those who genuinely need it,
Right.
while also making sure that people still have an incentive to work hard and improve their skills.
Like you need both.
You do.
You need support for people who are struggling,
Yeah.
but you also need to encourage people to strive for something better.
You got it.
Yeah.
It can't be an either situation.
Right.
And I think one really important piece of this puzzle is recognizing the dignity of work. People want to feel like they're contributing to society.
Yeah.
Like they're taking care of themselves and their families.
Yeah.
And if you take that away, you risk creating a culture of dependency.
Right.
And that doesn't really help anyone in the long run.
Yeah, it makes
Yeah.
sense. It goes back to that idea that income is something that you earn.
It does.
It's not just something that's handed to you.
Exactly.
There's like a sense of pride and accomplishment that comes with earning a living.
There is. And when people feel that sense of pride and accomplishment,
Yeah.
they're much more likely to be productive members of society.
So it's not just about handouts. It's about creating a system that helps people reach their full potential.
Right.
But then that brings us back to the role of government.
Yeah.
Like, where do they fit into all of this?
Well, as you can imagine, the role of government in the economy is a very hotly debated topic.
I bet.
Some people think the government should just stay out of it and let the free market do its thing.
Okay.
Others believe that the government should be much more active, regulating markets, providing a strong social safety net.
Yeah.
There's no easy answer that everyone agrees on.
Right. So it sounds like it's about finding that balance.
It is.
Where the government is providing support and creating opportunities,
Yeah.
but without stifling innovation and individual initiative.
You nailed it. It's about fostering an environment where everyone has a chance to succeed, while also recognizing that ultimately, individuals are responsible for their own destinies.
It makes me think about all the assumptions we make about the economy.
Yeah.
We tend to think of it as this like fixed system,
Mm.
but it's actually constantly changing.
It is. People are constantly adapting, innovating, finding new ways to create value.
It's so dynamic.
Yeah, and that's one of the most exciting things about economics. It's not a zero-sum game. When you create the right conditions, everybody has the potential to benefit.
I love that.
Yeah.
So maybe the real question isn't about how to divide up the pie we have.
Right.
It's about figuring out how to bake a bigger and better pie for everyone.
I love that. That's the kind of thinking that can lead to real progress.
Yeah, that's a really great way to think about it. You know, it's not about scarcity. It's not about competition. It's about creating more opportunities for everybody. But it also makes you wonder, like, what are the ingredients for that bigger and better pie?
Yeah.
And how do we encourage people to bake it?
Those are the million-dollar questions, right? The things that economists and policymakers are always trying to figure out. And while there's no, like, magic formula, I think a good place to start is by recognizing the importance of incentives.
Okay.
People respond to incentives, whether it's the drive to earn more money or build a successful business or just, improve their lives and the lives of their families.
So we need to create a system where those incentives are actually aligned with our goals.
Exactly. Like a tax system that rewards hard work and innovation, that can encourage people to take risks and come up with new ideas. And education systems that give people the skills they need to succeed in today's world, that can empower them to really contribute and reach their full potential.
So instead of just focusing on redistributing the wealth that already exists, we should be thinking about how to create more wealth in the first place.
Exactly. It's about shifting the focus from handouts to creating a system that motivates people to create. And it's also about building a culture that values hard work, creativity, entrepreneurship. When people believe that success is possible, they're much more likely to actually go for it.
This whole conversation has been so interesting.
It has.
It's really made me realize that this relationship between income and wealth and opportunity, it's so much more complicated than I think we often give it credit for.
It is. It's one of those things that seems really simple on the surface. But the deeper you dig, the more you realize just how much nuance there really is.
I think we've done a pretty good job of digging today.
We have.
We've touched on so many ideas, from John Stuart Mill to Karl Marx, from optimal tax theory to lump sum redistribution. We even challenged that whole idea that income is just distributed. And we talked about the importance of earning and incentives.
Yeah, and I think that's really the big takeaway here. If we really want to create a society that is both prosperous and just, we need to move beyond these simplistic ideas of just redistributing wealth and focus on building a system that actually empowers everyone to earn a good living and contribute to the common good.
I couldn't agree more. So to everyone listening out there, we'll leave you with this final thought. If income isn't just something to be sliced up like a pie, what does that mean for how we think about economic policy and social support systems, and even our own individual roles in creating a better future for everyone?
It's a question worth pondering.
It really is.
And I think understanding how wealth is created and how we can design systems that reward hard work and empower people, that's essential to creating a better world for everyone.